What would you do if everyone you knew looked at the one thing you'd spent your last dollar on, and laughed? For Wren Delaney, a 19-year-old orphan standing alone in the middle of the Kansas prairie with a brass plumb bob in her pocket, this wasn't a question. It was the next morning of her life. She had just paid $9,000, every cent her grandmother had left her, for 40 acres of land that the whole town of Mercy Flats called worthless. The clerk at the land office had actually apologized while taking her money. But beneath that scorched and stony ground, behind a wall of fieldstone that hadn't been touched in 22 years, something was waiting in the dark, a secret that would change her life, resurrect a dead man's good name, and humble every soul who had ever dismissed her. Settle in, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. To understand what Wren found, you first have to understand what her father taught her, because Callum Delaney was not a farmer, and he never pretended to be one. He was a well-digger and a stonemason, one of the last of the old kind, the kind who could stand on a piece of bare ground, close his eyes, and tell you within 2 feet where the water slept. He had dug 41 wells across 3 counties in his lifetime, and he had lined every one of them with fieldstone laid so true, so plumb, that old men would drive miles just to look down into them the way other men look at paintings. Wren's mother died of a winter fever when the girl was 4 years old, and from that year onward, Wren was raised at the edge of open holes in the ground. She learned to read the land before she learned to read a book. Her father taught her that soil speaks, that a line of greener grass in a dry August means water moving underneath, that willows and cottonwoods are tattletales, that stone remembers everything men do to it. He taught her to mix lime mortar until it stood like whipped cream on the hawk. He taught her to dress a fieldstone with 3 strikes of a 2-pound hammer, never 4. He taught her that a crooked wall always tells on itself eventually, and that a well is only as honest as its plumb line. The plumb line. Here is the thing you should hold in your mind, because it matters. When Wren was 9 years old, her father pressed into her small hand a brass plumb bob, 4 inches long, turned on a lathe by a machinist in Leavenworth, worn smooth as river stone by 30 years of his thumb. It hung from a tarred line marked with notches, 1 notch for every foot. Keep this on you, he told her, and you'll never be fooled by anything that's supposed to be straight. Water don't lie, Wren. Stone hides it. And men hide things worse than stone does. She did not understand that last part. Not then. She carried the plumb bob in her apron pocket every day for the next 10 years, and the brass wore a pale circle into the cloth, and the cloth wore soft against her leg, and it became less a tool than a heartbeat she could hold. Those were good years. Hard, lean, and good. Father and daughter traveled from homestead to homestead in a wagon that smelled of lime dust and coffee, and at night he would unroll his well logs, 41 notebooks, 1 for every well, and read her the measurements like bedtime stories. Curb depth. Seep line. Rate of flow. The names of the families who drank from each one. But here's the question that hangs over every good year, isn't it? What happens when the person who taught you everything is gone, and the world decides you're worth exactly what a ledger says you're worth? Wren Delaney was about to find out. Callum Delaney died the way well diggers fear most, though not in a hole. His heart simply stopped one October evening in 1895, at the age of 52, while he was oiling his windlass rope. Wren found him sitting on the well curb behind their rented rooms in Leavenworth, his tools laid out in perfect order beside him, as if he had known. He was buried on a Tuesday. The funeral cost $31, and Wren paid it from the tin box under the floorboards, and then she went to her father's only living relative, because that is what you do when you are 18 and alone, you go to family. Bram Delaney was Callum's younger brother, and the 2 men had not spoken in 11 years. Bram owned a feed and seed store, and he viewed the world through the small, clean window of a ledger book. When Wren stood in his parlor in her 1 black dress, he did not embrace her. He offered her a chair, opened a leather-bound account book, and told her the facts of her life the way a man reads out weights at a grain elevator. Her father, Bram said, had died owing money. Rent, doctor, burial plot fees outstanding. Bram had taken the liberty of settling the estate himself. There was, he said, almost nothing left. He turned the ledger around so she could see the column of figures, each one written in his small, exacting hand, and at the bottom of the column, circled once in pencil, was her inheritance as he had calculated it. $14. There is, however, one other item, Bram said, and here his voice changed, not warmer, never warmer, but careful, the way a man sounds when he is doing something he does not want witnessed. Their grandmother, Wren's father's mother, a woman Wren barely remembered, had left a small trust, held at the bank, that came due when Wren turned 19. $9,000. Bram had no power over it, he could not touch it, and you could see that this fact pained him like a stone in his shoe. But he could influence it. He slid a paper across the desk. He advised, in that careful voice, to sign the trust over to him for management. In exchange, he would give her $14 now and a room over the feed store, and she could work the counter. Wren looked at the ledger for a long moment. She did not argue. She did not cry. She picked up the pencil, wrote declined in the margin of his own document. Her father had taught her that a thing written down is a thing that stays true, and slid it back across the desk. Bram closed the ledger. Then we're settled, he said, and counted 14 paper dollars onto the desktop, one at a time, as if she were a bill being paid. A closed account. She left that house with a carpet bag containing 2 changes of clothes, her mother's wedding ring on a cord, 1 tin cup, her father's 41st well log. The unfinished one, and, at the very bottom of the bag, wrapped in flannel, the brass plumb bob. She had $14 in her pocket and $9,000 coming to her in 6 weeks, on her 19th birthday. What would you have done with it? Bought safety? Bought a room and a job and a small, invisible life? Let us know in the comments, because what Wren did next is the reason we're telling this story at all. The notice appeared in the newspaper 3 days later, folded around a fish, a bank auction in the township of Mercy Flats, 80 miles west, for a 40-acre farm, stone house, barn, 2 wells, improvements of uncertain condition. Asking price $9,000, exactly. The number seemed to reach up off the page and take her by the wrist, because it was the number she was going to have, to the dollar. Later, she would wonder if her grandmother had somehow known. But that is a thought for the end of the story. She rode the train as far as the line went, then a freight wagon the last 19 miles, and she watched the world come undone out the side of the wagon. The tidy clapboard towns gave way to sod houses. The sod houses gave way to raw prairie, grass running to the edge of the sky like water, and the road became 2-wheel ruts and then a suggestion. The air smelled of dry sage and distance. By the second day her hands were blistered from holding herself steady in the wagon bed, and her black dress had gone grey with dust, and the freighter, a leathery man named Coker, kept glancing back at her with an expression she couldn't read until, finally, he read it aloud for her. "You're the girl bought the Harker place." She said she was. Coker spat into the grass. "Then somebody owes you an apology, miss. That farm's been empty 11 years. Ground's gone sour on it, won't hold a crop past June. Wells dry. Barn's half down. Bank's been trying to sell it so long they've started paying people to look at it. $9,000. He shook his head with genuine sorrow. "You could have had the pick of 3 good farms for that." "I know," Wren said. "Then why?" She didn't answer him, because the truth was she couldn't have explained it. The number matching, the strange pull of it, her father's voice saying *water don't lie star. She just looked at the horizon and held the plumb bob in her pocket like a coal. The farm, when it finally rose up out of the grass, was worse than Coker had described. The stone house listed to the east. The barn leaned against the sky like a drunk against a lamppost. The fields were a skin of cracked clay over gravel, and the whole 40 acres lay under silence so complete it had texture. And there, at the gate, sat the land agent with the deed, a nervous young man named Pemberton, and beside him, leaning on a buggy whip, stood a man in a good suit who had no business being there at all. His name was Barclay Hume, and he owned, by most reckonings, a third of Mercy Flats. He looked at Wren the way a man looks at an error in an account. "Miss Delaney," he said pleasantly, "you've been sold a corpse. Happens to the best of us. I'll tell you what, I'll take it off your hands today for $3,500, cash, and you'll only have lost $5,500 instead of $9,000. That's a kindness. Ask anyone. A kindness." She looked at him, and she looked at the dead farm, and somewhere very deep in her a small bell rang, because her father had taught her that men hide things worse than stone does, and no man offers to buy a worthless thing unless he knows what it's worth. "No, thank you," she said, and took her deed, and walked through her own gate for the first time. Now, pause here, and ask yourself the question she couldn't yet answer. Why did the richest man in the county want the farm nobody wanted? Let us know in the comments what you think happens next. The first month nearly beat her. I want to be honest with you about that, because this story means nothing if you believe it was easy. She slept in the barn's one sound corner for the first 9 nights because the house roof had a hole over the bedroom you could drop a sheep through. She spent her remaining dollars, down from $14 to $6 to $2.40, on nails, lamp oil, flour, and a second-hand hoe. She worked from before dawn until her hands stopped obeying her, and her hands changed in that month the way a landscape changes in a flood year. The soft palms split, then calloused, then split again along the calluses, until her fingers looked like her father's fingers, and one night she sat staring at them by lamplight, and that was the only time in this whole story that she came close to tears. Not from pain. From the terrible size of it. 40 acres of sour, cracked ground and 2 wells that gave nothing but a mineral smell and an echo. The house well was the first one she opened, and here her father's training began to pay its dividends, slow and sure. She dropped the plumb bob. 28 feet to water. She pumped up a bucket, and the water was good, sweet, cold. So the house well wasn't dead at all, the intake had simply collapsed, and she spent 4 days down in it on a rope, relaying the cribbing stone by stone, exactly as she'd been taught, until the water stood clean at 14 feet. The town heard about that within the week, the girl who fixed her own well, and the laughter around the general store took on a different note. Not kinder, exactly. More attentive. But the second well, out in the south pasture, was the strange one. It was capped with a dressed stone lid, mortared in, the kind of cap you put on a well that has gone bad or been decommissioned. And Wren might have left it capped for years, except for the grass. It was mid-July. The county was 3 weeks into a drought that was killing corn by the acre, and every field in every direction had gone the color of straw. Every field, that is, except one thin line of grass in her south pasture, a seam of green, 3 feet wide and maybe 60 feet long, running from the capped well down toward a dry draw, green as the first week of May. She stood and looked at it for a long time, and her father's voice came back to her as clear as if he was standing at her shoulder. Water don't lie, Wren. Stone hides it. While she was standing there, an old man rode up on a mule. Otis Pike, 81 years old, a former well driller himself who lived in a dugout 2 miles east and mostly existed, the town said, on beans and opinions. He looked at the green seam for a long time without dismounting. Then he said the words that Wren would turn over in her mind for the next 5 weeks. That farm drinks from a well that don't show on no map, Otis Pike said. Men capped that hole for a reason, girl. And it won't because the water was bad. And he turned his mule and rode away, and would say nothing more about it, then or ever. Have you ever had a sentence follow you around like that, a sentence you didn't understand, that wouldn't leave you alone? Hold that feeling. Because the next part of this story, Wren Delaney went looking for what was underneath that green line. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hidden things and the people stubborn enough to find them. She began with the plumb bob, because her father had taught her that you never open ground without first asking it a question. She broke the mortar seal on the cap. The mortar was old, lime-weak, 20 years old at least, and it came away in flakes under her hammer, and she hauled the stone lid off with the barn's remaining good timber as a lever, and she dropped her plumb line down into the dark. The line went down, and the notches slid through her fingers. 30 feet. 40. The bob touched bottom at 47 feet, on stone. Dry. And here is the thing that made her sit back on her heels in the heat with her heart going like a trip hammer. A well that goes dry does not get asterisk capped and mortared star. A dry well gets abandoned. You only seal a well, seal it like a grave, with a dressed lid and a full mortar joint, if you don't want anyone opening it. And 47 feet was deep, deeper than any well for miles, and her father's voice came to her again, from the well logs he used to read aloud. Asterisk curb depth tells you what a man wanted, and nobody digs to 47 feet for stock water. Asterisk. She spent 2 days building the thing properly, because Callum Delaney's daughter did not go down a hole any other way. She re-timbered the windlass over the curb. She spliced and tarred 60 feet of new rope. She tested every knot the way her father had taught her. Asterisk, a knot you haven't tested is a prayer, not a knot. Asterisk. And on the third morning, at first light, she went down into the ground. 47 feet is a long way when the light above you shrinks to a coin, then a pinprick, then a memory. The walls of that well were the finest stonework she had ever touched, and she knew stonework the way other people know faces, and about 30 feet down she found the thing she'd half known she would find. The well went asterisk dry asterisk because it had been made to. The bottom 17 feet was sealed behind a wall of fieldstone laid across a natural fissure in the limestone, a wall mortared on the inside, where no weather would ever soften it. Behind that wall, her tapping hammer said, was hollow. A room-shaped hollow. She worked for 11 days. I want you to picture it, because this is the heart of who she was, a 19-year-old woman at the bottom of a well shaft, in lamplight, in her dead father's gloves, breaking a wall one stone at a time with a 2-pound hammer and a plugging chisel, feeding the loosened stones into a bucket, hauling the bucket up hand over hand, and going back down. Her forearms ached until they stopped aching. She learned to rest by hanging in the harness with her forehead against the cool stone. On the 9th day, 3 stones in from the face, the chisel punched through into nothing, and a breath of air came out of the dark that had not moved in over 20 years. Cold, dry, mineral air, smelling faintly, impossibly, of machine oil and old paper. On the 11th day the hole was wide enough, and Wren Delaney put the lamp through first, and then her head, and then she climbed into a chamber that no living soul had entered since 1874. What do you think she found in there? Gold. Bones. Nothing at all? Tell us in the comments, and stay, because the truth is better than any of the guesses. The chamber was 12 feet by 9, cut into the limestone where spring had once run. You could still see the old watercourse, dry as a scar, under the floor, and it had been fitted out with a care that spoke of weeks, not hours, of hidden labor. 3 oak chests, iron-banded, sat along the north wall. A dealt table stood against the south wall, and on it, a oilcloth-wrapped parcel, a brass lamp, a small stack of leather journals. She counted them later, 17, and a wooden crate of tools gone to rust. And on the table, set apart from everything else, in a way that told you at once it was the most important object in the room, stood a sealed tin box with a single sheet of paper laid on top of it, folded once, the ink faded to the color of weak tea. For words were written on it, asterisk to whoever finds this dot asterisk. Wren did not open the chests first. Let that be said of her. She opened the letter first, and sat down on the floor of the chamber with the lamp beside her, and read it through twice, and then a 3rd time aloud, softly, because some things should not be read in silence even when you are alone. Here is what it said, word for word. Asterisk to whoever finds this. My name is Elias Crane, and I was paymaster for the Kansas Western Railroad, and for 22 years I have been called a thief, and I was not. In April of 1874 I was carrying the spring payroll, $61,540 in gold, when we were stopped on the Platte Road by men who knew our route, our hour, and our strongbox. 9 men died that day, 4 of them mine. The company decided it was easier to blame me than to admit the route was sold, and the detective they sent to bury the truth was a young man named Hume, who made his first money making a liar of me. Asterisk. Asterisk I found the gold. It took me 9 years. The men who took it are dead, and I will not say how. I brought it here, to a farm I bought under another name, and I sealed it in the ground, because while I hunted it my wife Adeline and my daughter Ruth died of the fever in Cheyenne, and there was no one with them, and the money had become a thing I could not touch without seeing their faces. Asterisk. Asterisk if you have found this, you are patient and you are skilled and you do not give up, because no other kind of person could have come through that wall. So it is yours, all of it, and I give it freely, with 2 asks. Pay the families of the 9 men if any are left, their names are in the first journal. And do not let this ground lie dead. It was meant to feed people. Make it live again. E.C. 1883. Asterisk. Then, silence. A silence that had been waiting 47 feet underground for 13 years. Wren opened the chests. The gold was there, packed in canvas rolls, $20 double eagles, 3,077 coins. $61,540. More money than Mercy Flats had seen in its whole existence. And in the tin box, on top of a deed to the farm made out in the name asterisk E. Calloway asterisk, the false name, the name the bank had corrupted to Harker over the years, lay the last thing in the chamber, a small carved wooden bird, a wren, no bigger than her thumb, its wings half open. On the bottom, in a child's scratched letters, asterisk for Papa. Asterisk. She sat in the lamplight with her father's plumb bob in one hand and a dead man's carved bird in the other, and she understood, all at once, what Otis Pike had meant, and what her father had meant, and what the green line of grass had been saying all along. It was real. All of it was real. Now here is the fork in the road, and every story like this one has it. Wren Delaney was 19 years old, sitting on $61,540 in gold, and the world contained trains, and ships, and cities where no one knew her name. What would you have done? Honestly, in the comments, tell us. Because no one would have blamed her for disappearing. She didn't disappear. She climbed out of the well at dusk, and she walked her 40 acres in the dark, and by morning she had made 3 decisions, and she never spoke of them to anyone as decisions. She simply began doing them, which is a different thing entirely, and a rarer one. The first decision was the money wasn't hers yet. She took the first journal, the one with the 9 names, and she spent $41 on train tickets over 1 long month, and she found, still living, the families of 4 of the 9 dead guards, in Topeka, in Salina, in a dugout in the Sandhills. To each she delivered, in person, the wages that had been owed for 22 years, plus every penny of interest she could calculate, and to each she said the same short sentence, "Elias Crane sent this. He was innocent, and here's the proof." She put the journal's key pages in the mail to the state newspaper in Topeka. Then she came home. The second decision was the farm. She paid cash, quietly, always quietly, through the bank in the next county so as not to start a panic or a robbery, for what the farm needed. Lumber. Seed. A hired crew of 2 men at $1.75 a day each. And the town began to come to her, one practical soul at a time, the way it always happens, not with friendship, but with respect, which in a place like Mercy Flats is the harder currency. Tobias Reed, the carpenter, came out one morning without being asked and straightened her leaning gatepost, set it in fresh concrete, and left. He never mentioned it. She never thanked him. The next week there was a smoked ham on her table and his wagon was in her yard, and by summer's end he had rebuilt her barn roof and she had paid him, in full, on the nail, every Friday. The only person in the county, he told people, who never once asked him to wait on a debt. Widow Abernathy, Gertie, arrived with a chicken and 4 jars of preserves and stayed 11 years, though nobody knew that yet. Harlan Bogue, the smith, sharpened every tool she owned and refused her money twice before accepting a trade. He wanted to see the stonework at the bottom of the well, the wall she'd broken through, and he went down the rope like a boy and came up an hour later and shook her hand, hard, and after that, Harlan Bogue did her ironwork at cost and would hear no word against her anywhere in the county. And Otis Pike rode over on his mule one evening, looked at the rebuilt windlass, the clean fields, the crew at work, and said only, "Told you that hole warn't capped for bad water." Which, from Otis, was a blessing. The green line of grass, by the way, she traced to its source, the old spring course under the chamber, still seeping, still alive. She opened it properly, stone-lined, her father's way. By the following spring, that seep fed a pond, and the pond fed 40 acres, and 40 acres of sour ground did the thing everyone in Mercy Flats had sworn it could never do. It bloomed. News of money travels faster than the money itself, and by fall, both men came to her, the uncle and the speculator, and neither meeting went the way either man expected. Wren Delaney arrived first, in a hired buggy, with his ledger. He had read the newspaper. He explained, in his careful counting-house voice, that her grandmother's trust had clearly been misapplied, that the estate had been improperly settled, and that as executor he was prepared to be reasonable. He would take only 1/3 of whatever had been found, and say no more about it. He laid the ledger open on her new kitchen table like a hand of cards. Wren did not raise her voice. She slid 2 documents across the table. The first was the bank's own record showing the trust had passed to her clean, outside Bram's reach, which he already knew. The second was a letter from her grandmother's attorney, a letter that had waited 11 years to be sent, stating that the $9,000 had been set aside specifically with the instruction that it was for Callum's girl when the world weighs her and finds her light. Bram read it twice. He closed his ledger. He left, and the room over the feed store stayed empty a long time after, and people in Leavenworth noticed, and people in Leavenworth talked, the way they do, and a man who treats kin as a closed account finds that his own accounts, in time, get quietly closed by others. Barclay Hume came 3 weeks later, and he was not smiling this time, because the state newspaper had run the Crane journals, all of them, including the page about the young detective named Hume who had buried the truth of the 1874 robbery and made his first money doing it. The detective had been Hume's father, and the money had become the seed of the Hume holdings, and now every man in the county could read it in newsprint. Hume offered her $20,000 for the farm for the spring, of course. He'd always known about the spring. That's why he'd wanted the place, and she said no, and he threatened lawyers, and she said, "The journals are in the public record now, Mr. Hume. I'd be glad to see them read aloud in a courtroom." That was the whole conversation. He faded the way powerful men fade when the ground under them turns out to be made of paper. Slowly, then all at once, and within 2 years his holdings were mostly sold, mostly to the families he had once squeezed. She never raised her voice at either of them. She never had to. Isn't it something, how often justice, the real kind, arrives not with a shout but with a signature, a document, a fact set quietly on a table? A year to the day after she walked through that broken gate, Wren Delaney stood at the same gate at dusk, and it no longer leaned, and neither did anything else. The 40 acres that the county had called worthless were in winter wheat and alfalfa, green to the draw. The spring pond held ducks. The barn stood straight and true with a new roof that Tobias Reed had framed, and the stone house, repointed, re-roofed, lime-washed, had lamplight in every window and smoke coming out of the chimney like a promise kept. The sign at the gate read *** Crane and Delaney ***, because she had put the dead man's name first, and no one in Mercy Flats thought that strange. Her days had a rhythm now, and it was a rhythm made of people. Gertie Abernathy's coffee on the stove by 5, strong enough to float a nail, and 2 cups always poured. Tobias on Fridays, paid on the nail. Harlan Bogue's ironwork delivered the first Monday of the month, and Wren's accounts settled the same day. Otis Pike's mule standing hip-shot at the fence some evenings, the old man saying almost nothing, which was his way of saying everything. She had dug 3 new wells for neighbors that year at half price, the well-digger's daughter, plumb bob in her pocket, 41 notebooks in her father's hand on her shelf and a 42nd now begun in hers, and families drank from them, and when strangers asked who had dug such true work, the town said her name the way you say the name of someone who belongs. The gold she did not need for the farm sat in a bank vault in Topeka, mostly untouched. It turned out she had not wanted to be rich. She had wanted to be *true*, plumb, and those are not the same thing, and her father and Elias Crane had each, in his own way, spent a lifetime teaching her the difference. On the last evening of this story, Wren came out to the south pasture at sunset, to the well that was no longer a secret, and she sat on the curbstone her own hands had rebuilt, and she took the 2 objects from her pockets and held them side by side in the last of the light. In her left hand, the brass plumb bob, 4 inches long, worn smooth by 2 lifetimes of thumbs now, hers and her father's. A man she had known. A man who had given her a skill, and a sentence, * water don't lie, men hide things worse than stone * that turned out to be a map. In her right hand, the carved wooden wren, its wings half open, * for Papa * scratched on its belly by a little girl who had died waiting for her father to come home. A man she had never met. A man who had given her a trust, and a task, * make it live again * that turned out to be a life. One man had taught her how to find what was hidden. The other had taught her what to do with it. And she sat there between the 2 of them, in the grass her spring had greened, while the light went down over 40 acres that everyone had called worthless. She was 19 years old when she was cast out of her uncle's house with $14 to her name. She spent $9,000, every cent she had in the world, on 40 acres of ground that a whole town laughed at. And underneath it waited $61,540, 1 letter, and a second chance for everyone the truth had ever touched. Worthless, they'd said. Water don't lie. And neither, in the end, does the ground. Thank you for staying with us for this story of hidden worth and quiet justice. If you were moved by Wren's journey, please give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs reminding that the thing everyone dismisses is sometimes the thing that saves you. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell, so you won't miss our next tale, the story of a sea captain's widow and the lighthouse ledger that 3 towns fought over. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what did *you carry out of the hardest chapter of your life, the small object, the small lesson, that turned out to be a map? We read every one. Until then, be well. And remember, the ground keeps its secrets only from those who never think to ask it.